were the people whom global capitalism rendered superfluous. These were the people who could find no jobs, largely because manufacturing was exported to countries where labor costs were low and where unions had not been organized. These were the people who could not count on welfare services, who could not afford to pay for health care. And I should say, in the countries of the global south, the structural adjustment processes caused a shift of capital to profitable sectors and therefore left people deprived of opportunities for education and for recreation and for housing and healthcare as well. So these were people from racialized communities subject to constant hyper-surveillance. One deviation from the law and they are caught in the net of law enforcement. These are also the people compelled by force of circumstances to find other, sometimes illegal means of making a living. In the United States and in other countries, the dismantling of welfare and other social services left many poor women, especially women of color, in far more difficult straits. And you see the populations of women in prison rising as a result of these processes. Now, this was the process in the US. And as I pointed out, in countries of the global south subject to structural adjustment, new jails and new prisons began to dot the landscape of these countries. This was the setting for the development of a gigantic global prison industrial complex. Now, we haven't yet explored how profitable this undertaking turned out to be, with profits compared to those reaped by companies that receive military contracts and make huge amounts of money from the violence of war. We are familiar, right, with the military-industrial complex. I should slow down? I'm sorry, I get so excited about this. Okay, so where did you lose me, or where did I lose you? Just a little bit? Okay. So, I was talking about the companies that get military contracts. And, I mean, we could talk about Blackwater and the security firms in Iraq, right? And the privatization of the war in Iraq and the war in Afghanistan. But the point that I'm trying to make is that a formation similar to what we have been calling for a long time the military-industrial complex began to take shape. Now we must talk about the profitable enterprise of punishment, the process of making huge amounts of money from the violence of imprisonment. And then this process regenerates and reproduces itself. More prisoners equal more profits for the architectural firms, for construction companies, for the private medical companies that ostensibly provide health care for prisoners, more profits for the companies that provide services for the prisons, food, uniforms, soap, telephone calls, and we can go on and on. So I think you get why prisons can become so profitable, particularly if they expand to enormous proportions. And so if prisons are profitable, then there are companies and agencies that have a stake in the further expansion of prisons, regardless of what is just or what is not just. And so this has nothing to do with the individuals who are caught in the net of law enforcement. It has to do with the potential profits that companies can reap. And so you have private prison companies like CCA, Corrections Corporation of America, that roam the world seeking to profit from the construction and operation of new prisons. And I have been told that CCA has been involved in prison construction here in Colombia. Now, prisons not only sequester human beings, but they devour the resources that ought to be used for education and housing and health. And they also act as a haven for backward ideologies. Racism especially has found a refuge in the prisons, both in the US and throughout the world. The US Bureau of Justice Statistics concluded recently that a black male born in 2001, 9 years ago, has a 32% chance of going to jail. Latino males have a 17% chance. And white males have a 6% chance. Now, despite the fact that black youth account for 16% of the juvenile population, they are 28% of juvenile arrests, 30% of youth in jails, and 58% of youth sent to adult prisons. And so the US leads the world in incarceration. And despite the fact that we have one black man in the White House, there's well over 1 million black men in what we call the big house, which is the penitentiary. That drives the prison industrial complex, and it has been extended outward from the US to become the leading strategy for addressing, or better not addressing, the problems of poverty that have been created by and exacerbated by global capitalism. Prisons rely on and benefit from racism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia. Prisons help to stabilize binary and simplistic notions of gender. And prisons are especially oppressive to gay, lesbian, and transgender people. But what is perhaps most dangerous of all is that prisons are designed to create a false sense of security. And I know here in Colombia, security is a constant issue. I don't think I've opened my purse as many times over the last couple of days for someone to look in it and had my purse sniffed by dogs. But anyway, I was talking about the false sense of security that prisons create. Prisons create the impression that the bad people are behind bars, and the good people are those who inhabit the free world, the so-called free world. So let me conclude by saying that we urgently need alternatives to imprisonment. We need to dismantle the prison industrial complex. People whose economic and social conditions lead them along trajectories that lead to prison need better opportunities. And for this, we need new societies that are not based on the capitalist notion of profit, but rather on the principle of serving the needs of human beings, of all human beings, women, men, transgender persons, poor people, black people, other people of color, LGBT communities, disabled people, older people, and also our non-human companions as well. And all that entails. So let me say finally that I call upon you to join hands and unite our hearts and unite our voices in a struggle for a better world. Thank you.